what happens when the physical body stops working? I mean, does our awareness, our consciousness just switch off?
Or does something essential, something us carry on somehow?
Exactly. These are the really huge questions, aren't they? The ones humans have, well, wrestled with forever.
Absolutely. And for millennia, people have looked to faith, to philosophy, various spiritual paths to explore these mysteries, seeking answers, comfort,
Yeah.
meaning.
Those traditions offer, incredibly profound insights for so many. But in this deep dive, we're coming at it from maybe a slightly different angle.
Right.
We want to look at what happens right there at that edge, that threshold between life and whatever comes next, but through the lens of observation.
Mm-hmm. What's been reported?
Yes. Our source material today really focuses on specific phenomena reported by people who've been right there at that brink.
That's right. So our mission here, using the sources you shared, is to explore 3 specific kinds of experiences. Near-death experiences, NDEs for short,
Okay.
experiences on the threshold of death, TOD sex, and shared death experiences, or SDEs. Right.
We want to try and unpack what the sources tell us about these experiences, what they're like, who tends to have them, and maybe what they might suggest about consciousness itself.
And we're going to stick really close to the evidence and the accounts laid out in the material, using it as our guide for this exploration.
Sounds good.
So let's jump in with probably the most famous one, near-death experiences. What exactly are we talking about when we say NDE?
Well, think of NDEs as these really profound, often quite long-lasting mental experiences. They're reported by people who were right on the edge, either physiologically, meaning their body was failing.
Like cardiac arrest.
Exactly. Cardiac arrest is a prime example. Or psychologically, like maybe during a really bad accident where they genuinely thought they were about to die.
So not just, feeling a bit faint, but genuinely at death's door. And the sources say these can happen in all sorts of really dramatic situations. Yeah. Oh, yes. Cardiac arrest is the classic, but also severe accidents, critical illness, major complications during surgery or childbirth, even things like coma, extreme intoxication, electrocution.
Basically, any situation pushing someone to the absolute limit of physical viability.
Pretty much, yes. And what's really striking when you look at the prevalence data presented is just how common these seem to be, relatively speaking.
How common are we talking?
Well, studies cited suggest maybe around 4% of the Western population report having had an NDE at some point.
4%. That's a lot of people.
It is. Over the last 50 years, that could be over 25 million people worldwide. And interestingly, with advances in medical tech, like defibrillators becoming more common.
Saving more people from cardiac arrest.
Exactly. The potential for these experiences might actually be increasing because more people are surviving these really critical events.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting, based on the research presented. You might assume these experiences happen to specific kinds of people, right? Maybe very spiritual individuals, or perhaps only those with certain conditions.
That's a natural assumption, but the sources indicate pretty much the opposite.
Really?
Yeah. The research suggests NDEs don't really seem to discriminate based on gender, race, socioeconomic status, education level, or, and this is crucial, pre-existing belief systems.
This doesn't matter what you believed before.
Apparently not. They seem to happen just as often among atheists and agnostics as they do among deeply religious people, which kind of points towards maybe a universal human phenomenon, something that can occur regardless of your background or beliefs.
And while every NDE is unique, personal, the accounts that researchers have collected show this remarkable pattern. There are common elements that keep showing up.
Yes, that's right. Although it's rare for someone to report experiencing all the potential elements, there's definitely a discernible sequence and a set of phenomena that many NDEs describe.
Okay, let's unpack those common elements then, based on the sources. One of the most talked about has to be the out-of-body experience, the OBE. What's the reported sensation?
Right, the OBE. It's that feeling of separating from the physical body. People describe perceiving things from a viewpoint outside or above their body, sometimes even from quite a distance away.
Seeing themselves, perhaps.
Often, yes. Seeing their own body in the surroundings. And what makes this particularly compelling, based on the sources, is the state of consciousness they report during these OBEs.
Which is?
Well, far from being diminished or confused, which you might expect if the body is failing, experiencers often describe their mental faculties, their awareness, perception, thought, memory, sense of identity, will, emotions, as being not just intact, but actually heightened, sharper, clearer.
Heightened consciousness when the body is shutting down. That feels counterintuitive.
It really does. They report incredibly sharp hearing, sometimes panoramic or 360-degree vision, a mind that feels amazingly alert and lucid. Some accounts even mention abilities like projecting their awareness to other locations, passing through walls, or perceiving the thoughts of people nearby.
That's incredible.
And this OBE component, it's highlighted as being potentially the most objective part of the NDE. Because, in principle, the perceptions they have during this state could potentially be verified later.
Right, if they saw something specific happening that they couldn't normally see or know about.
Exactly. That's where corroboration comes in, which we'll touch on later.
Okay, so OBEs offer this potential for external validation. But a lot of the NDE experience is deeply subjective, internal. What are some of those personal aspects people report?
Yeah, the sources detail quite a few. Very frequently, there's this overwhelming feeling of profound peace and joy, a complete absence of pain, of fear.
That sounds appealing.
It does.
Yeah.
This is often accompanied by a sense of movement, maybe through a dark space or what's often described as a tunnel.
Famous
Tunnel, yes.
Yeah.
Which commonly leads towards an intensely bright, but usually described as beautiful, warm, welcoming light.
Not a harsh light.
No, typically not. People also describe encountering visions of another realm, another reality often depicted as being incredibly beautiful, maybe with stunning natural landscapes or radiant cities, gardens, places of immense splendor. And many report hearing extraordinary music, ethereal, unlike anything earthly.
And they often meet people or beings.
Yes, very commonly. NDE accounts frequently include encounters with deceased family members or friends. And interestingly, they're often seen as vibrant and healthy, sometimes appearing younger than when they passed away.
Younger, really? That's fascinating.
Quite consistently reported. And then there's often a meeting with what's termed a being of light.
A being of light. What's that described as?
It's typically described not so much by form, but by its qualities. It communicates, often telepathically, and radiates this overwhelming feeling of total acceptance and unconditional love, just pure love and understanding.
Wow.
The sources do note that while the experience itself is very similar across accounts, how people interpret this being can sometimes be influenced by their cultural or religious background.
So someone Christian might see Jesus, a Buddhist might see Buddha.
Potentially, yes. But the core reported qualities, the light, the love, the acceptance, seem remarkably consistent regardless of the label applied afterwards.
And sometimes, maybe in the presence of this being of light, another really powerful event happens. The life review.
Ah, yes, the life review. That's a core element for many NDErs. People describe seeing their entire life flash before them.
Like a movie.
Sometimes described that way, but often much more immersive. Not just watching, but reliving key moments, and sometimes, crucially, experiencing those moments from the perspective of the other people involved.
Feeling how their actions affected others.
Exactly. The sources suggest the purpose isn't judgment from the outside, but a profound self-assessment, gaining insights into their life's meaning, the lessons learned or missed, prompting reflection on how they lived.
That sounds incredibly intense.
Deeply intense, yes. After these often powerful experiences, the OBE, the light, the beings, the review, there usually comes a point where the journey reaches a kind of culmination, sometimes described with imagery like a boundary or a barrier.
A point of no return.
That's the feeling, yes. Experiencers might perceive a wall, a bridge, a river, a mist, something signifying that crossing over means fully leaving their physical life. And at this point, often the being of light, or maybe the deceased relatives they encountered, will communicate that they have to go back.
Why?
The reason usually given is that their time isn't up yet. Their life on Earth isn't finished, they have unachieved goals, lessons still to learn, maybe a mission to fulfill.
And they have to return, even if they want to stay.
Generally, yes. The sources indicate that experiencers feel compelled to return at this point, even if they felt immense peace or joy where they were.
So they come back. But the sources are very clear. They don't come back the same. The impact is huge.
This is one of the most consistent findings in all the NDE research discussed. For the vast majority, the experience is deeply positive and fundamentally life-altering.
In what ways?
Research shows that NDErs often develop this remarkably similar psychological profile after the experience, pretty much regardless of their personality before. These changes affect their core beliefs, their values, their attitudes, their behavior, their entire outlook on life.
And these aren't just temporary changes, like a short-term boost after surviving something.
No, that's a key point. These changes tend to become more apparent over time, and they don't resemble the kind of transient shifts you might see after, say, a period of confusion or a simple hallucination. They're deep and lasting.
Can you give some examples of those specific reported changes?
Sure. There's often a significant shift in self-perception. People report better self-esteem, more confidence, less reliance on what others think.
A stronger sense of self.
Exactly. Many report gaining this powerful sense that life has a purpose and that their job is to figure out and fulfill their own mission on Earth. There's often increased gratitude, a deeper appreciation for life itself. The world just seems more meaningful, more interesting.
And how does their view of the world and other people change?
It seems to broaden quite dramatically. Their concerns often expand to include a greater sensitivity towards all living things, a real care for the environment, the health of the planet.
More compassion.
Definitely. Socially, they tend to become less judgmental, more tolerant, significantly more altruistic and compassionate. This often leads them towards charity work or humanitarian efforts. They also commonly report wanting to spend more quality time with loved ones, family, friends.
So the things society often values, power, fame, money, how do those fit in afterwards?
They tend to lose their appeal. The sources note that after an NDE, many come to see the relentless pursuit of power, fame, material success as feeling, well, kind of pointless and empty.
That's a huge shift in values. What about their fundamental beliefs, spirituality, religion?
Right. There's often a reported move away from formal religious affiliations or dogma, but interestingly, a corresponding increase in personal spirituality.
Less religion, more spirituality.
That seems to be the trend described. Many develop a greater interest in things like meditation, contemplation, maybe going on retreats. But perhaps the most profound shift, cited across the sources, is that regardless of whether they were previously religious, agnostic, or atheist, NDE experiencers often gain an absolute, unshakable certainty that life continues after the physical body dies.
Certainty, not just belief.
That's how it's consistently described. A felt knowing. And certainty in the existence of some kind of transcendent principle, call it God, universal consciousness, the source again, regardless of their prior stance.
That shift from I believe or I don't believe to I know is really significant. The sources also mention some NDEs reporting new abilities.
Yes, that's mentioned too. In some cases, individuals report developing what might be termed psi abilities, maybe instances of clairvoyance, telepathy, precognition. Sometimes they even talk about trying to consciously retrieve knowledge or insights they gained during the NDE, things that feel just out of reach in normal waking life.
Now, while the long-term impact sounds overwhelmingly positive, the sources do acknowledge that integrating such a massive experience isn't always easy, especially at first.
That's a really important caveat. The immediate aftermath can be quite challenging. Many NDErs feel deeply shaken, struggling to make sense of it, to reconcile it with their old view of the world.
And maybe facing disbelief from others.
Exactly. If they're met with skepticism or dismissal from family, friends, or even doctors, that can make the integration process much harder. The sources note it's not unusual for people to experience periods of depression, loneliness, even a kind of nostalgia for the peace they felt during the NDE, particularly in the first few years.
It makes sense. It's a lot to process. And while most NDEs sound like experiences of light and peace, the sources also mention that a small number are reported as unpleasant, even scary. These are sometimes called negative NDEs.
Yes, that's also part of the picture, though less common. These experiences might involve intense anxiety, maybe a terrifying feeling during the passage through the tunnel, or a sense of being lost or trapped in what's described as an absolute void.
Are there any factors linked to these negative experiences?
Some studies suggest possible correlations with things like maybe high levels of egocentricity before the event, intense fear of dying, unresolved anger or guilt, or perhaps a strong pre-existing belief in hell or punishment.
One of the sources provides a very graphic account of a negative NDE, reported by Dr. Jean-Jacques Charbonnier. It really illustrates this possibility.
It's a very powerful description, yes. This person, during heart failure, described entering this very dark cone, spiraling downwards, feeling pulled by a strong current.
And seeing others.
Yes, seeing these wrinkled, grimacing faces of people who seem to be in immense suffering, screaming, but without sound. And the experiencer reported feeling their suffering deeply. This journey led them towards what they perceived initially as an immense flame, which they interpreted as hell.
That sounds terrifying. But was there more to it? Did it end there?
Interestingly, no. The account says the flame then started to dance funnily, enveloped the person, and then communicated with them, asking about how they had helped others in their life.
A kind of life review element, even within the negative experience.
It seems so. And this interaction reportedly led the person to a stark realization about their own past, seeing it as filled with petty thefts and scams.
So even a deeply unpleasant NDE might contain seeds of transformation.
That appears to be the perspective offered in the sources. They note that most experiences labeled negative actually contain many positive elements too, and even the distressing parts often lead to positive long-term consequences.
Like what?
Like losing their fear of dying afterwards, finding or recovering faith, and often interpreting the whole thing, even the scary parts, as a profound wake-up call, a catalyst for changing their entire life.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's move to an area that, for many, poses the biggest scientific challenge regarding NDEs. These instances where perceptions reported during the NDE seem to match objective reality, even when the person was medically unresponsive, clinically dead.
Right. This is where it gets really critical from a scientific standpoint, because it directly bumps up against conventional medical understanding.
Explain that a bit. What happens medically during, say, cardiac arrest?
Okay, so in cardiac arrest, the heart stops pumping blood. Blood flow to the brain ceases almost immediately. Breathing stops. And within about 10 to 20 seconds, the electrical activity of the brain, the kind we measure with an EEG, disappears. It goes flatline. This is the state defined as clinical death.
Though Dr. Charbonnier apparently calls it provisional death.
Yes, he proposes that term because, as we know, people can sometimes be revived after minutes in this state, which challenges the idea of death being instantly final and irreversible.
And based on a purely materialist view, mind equals brain activity if the brain has no detectable electrical activity.
Then there should be no conscious experience. Certainly not clear, coherent perceptions of the external world that can be recalled later. That's the standard medical model.
But the studies,
Yeah.
the sources mention research involving hundreds of NDE survivors from hospitals in the Netherlands, Belgium, UK, US.
Yes, and this research presents data that seems to directly contradict that expectation. These studies consistently find that around 15%, that's roughly 1 in 7 cardiac arrest survivors, do recount memories from the period when they were clinically dead.
Memories from when the EEG was flat.
Memories from the time when EEG activity was not detectable, yes. This finding is incredibly striking because it suggests that consciousness, awareness, perception, thought, emotion might be able to occur even when the brain activity usually associated with it isn't measurable.
Now, I know a common counter-argument brought up is, well, maybe the surface EEG just isn't sensitive enough. Maybe there's still activity deep in the brain.
The sources address that. And while it's true that surface EEG mainly picks up cortical activity, the outer layer, the general consensus among neuroscientists, is that the complex integrated activity needed for conscious experience is largely cortical and is perfectly measurable by surface EEG.
So the argument is, the kind of activity needed for consciousness is demonstrably absent.
That's the point the sources make, yes. During cardiac arrest, that specific type of organized brain activity linked to conscious awareness is considered clearly absent, not just hiding somewhere that EEG can't see.
And the sources also draw a distinction between the OBEs reported in NDEs and certain neurological illusions, right? Like those induced by stimulating parts of the brain.
Yes, they reference work by researchers like Olaf Blank. Stimulating a specific area, the angular gyrus, can induce weird bodily sensations, feeling like you're floating, or seeing your legs shrink, that sort of thing.
Those are felt as illusions.
Exactly. Patients typically describe them as illusions, as strange or false perceptions. They don't usually involve accurate, verifiable perception of the actual environment around them.
Whereas NDE, OBEs sometimes do involve perceptions that can be checked against reality.
Precisely. The NDE accounts can include verifiable details about the resuscitation efforts, the room, the people present, events happening nearby. And this is a key point the sources emphasize. In some cases, these NDE accounts have been independently corroborated by witnesses who were there and confirmed the patient's reported perceptions.
Okay, let's get into those corroborated cases. The sources detail some really compelling ones. The first one is often called the dentures case, from Dr. Pim van Lommel's study.
Right. This was a 44-year-old man brought into the hospital in deep coma, cyanotic blue from lack of oxygen after a cardiac arrest. The resuscitation was difficult, and they had to intubate him. To do that, a nurse removed his upper dentures and put them aside on the emergency cart.
Standard procedure in that situation, and then what happened?
About a week later, he'd recovered consciousness. The same nurse came to give him his medication. He recognized her immediately and said, "Oh, you're the nurse. You know where my dentures are."
He remembered her from the resuscitation, when he was comatose.
Apparently so. And then, to her absolute astonishment, he gave this incredibly detailed account of the whole resuscitation scene from an out-of-body perspective. He described seeing himself lying in the bed, watching the medical team working on him. He accurately described the small room who was there, and crucially, he described seeing her remove his dentures and place them on that specific cart, even noting details like the bottles on it and the sliding drawer underneath.
He saw all that while clinically dead and unconscious.
That's the profound implication, yes. He was completely unresponsive, no gag reflex, flat EDG reported during the arrest period, yet he reported seeing and hearing verifiable details from an external vantage point. He even mentioned feeling fear and trying desperately to signal he was still alive.
How did the nurse react?
She was amazed, reportedly. And the sources note this experience profoundly changed the man. He completely lost his fear of death afterwards.
That's a powerful story. There's another corroborated case mentioned, the Mansfield case, told by cardiologist Richard Mansfield to researcher Sam Parnia.
Yes, another striking one. This involved a 32-year-old man who went into cardiac arrest. No pulse, no breathing, flatlined ECG for over half an hour, despite resuscitation efforts. Dr. Mansfield eventually decided they had to stop CPR. He checked the equipment, left the room briefly to make notes. Then he realized he hadn't properly counted the adrenaline doses given, so he went back into the room about 15 minutes after stopping CPR.
And when he went back,
He found the patient wasn't bluish anymore and actually had a pulse. They quickly resumed CPR successfully. The patient made a full recovery about a week later, remarkably with no brain damage.
amazing in itself. But then the NDE account.
Right. The patient later told Dr. Mansfield that he had witnessed everything Mansfield did during that period when he was clinically dead and CPR had stopped.
He saw Mansfield stop CPR, leave the room, come back.
Yes. He described seeing Mansfield check his pulse, make the decision to stop, leave the room, return sometime later, check his pulse again, and then restart the resuscitation efforts. He saw it all.
And Dr. Mansfield's reaction.
As reported in the source, he was utterly confused, calling it a medical impossibility. He couldn't fathom how the patient could know these details.
So these cases, the dentures case, the Mansfield case, they're presented as strong evidence because they involve clear, accurate perceptions of external events happening precisely when the brain, according to current understanding, shouldn't be capable of generating consciousness.
That's exactly why they're highlighted. They directly challenge the assumption that consciousness is solely dependent on measurable brain function.
Okay, these observations definitely raise questions. The source material then goes on to critique several biological explanations that have been proposed for NDEs, arguing they don't really capture the full picture.
That's right. The perspective presented is that while these biological hypotheses might touch on certain aspects, they ultimately fall short of explaining the sheer richness and multidimensionality of NDEs, especially the lucidity, the transformative after effects, and those verified perceptions we just discussed.
What's one of the main biological explanations proposed?
One of the earliest and probably most well-known is the dying brain, or anoxia hypothesis. This was championed by researchers like Susan Blackmore. The basic idea is that lack of oxygen, anoxia, reaching the brain during the dying process triggers abnormal neural firing.
Leading to hallucinations, like the tunnel and light.
That's the suggestion, yes, that maybe this neural chaos creates those specific illusions. But the sources raise several issues with this.
Such as?
Well, for starters, the tunnel and light aren't actually reported in all NDEs. More fundamentally, if lack of oxygen was the main cause, you'd expect most people suffering cardiac arrest or severe hypoxia to have an NDE, but they don't. Only a minority do. Also, consider people who experience severe oxygen deprivation for other reasons, like chronic lung or heart problems. They typically become confused, agitated, and have very poor memory of the episode afterwards. That's the opposite of the profound clarity, organized thought, and vivid, lasting memories reported in NDEs.
Good point. Confusion versus lucidity.
Exactly. And the sources also note that some NDEs happen when oxygen levels are perfectly normal, or even in situations where the person isn't physiologically close to death at all, like a psychological NDE from perceived threat.
What about other attempts to explain it biologically, like high G-force studies on pilots?
Right. Dr. James Winry's work in centrifuges, he induced brief unconsciousness, GLOC, which sometimes resulted in short, fragmented dreamlets due to reduced blood flow to the brain.
Similar to NDEs.
Not really, according to the critiques in the sources. These dreamlets were characterized by confusion. People couldn't remember what happened just before. They were disoriented when they woke up again. Very different symptoms from the coherent NDE accounts. And crucially, no reports of profound psychospiritual transformation resulted from GLOC.
Okay. Then there's the timing argument. Maybe NDEs don't happen during clinical death, but just before consciousness is lost, or just after it starts coming back, when the brain might still be partially functioning.
The sources counter this pretty strongly. They point out that the kind of unconsciousness caused by cardiac arrest usually leads to amnesia for the periods immediately before and after the event. You don't typically remember the moments right before you pass out or right after you regain consciousness.
And the state of consciousness during those transitions isn't usually clear and transformative.
No, it's typically confused and disoriented, which doesn't match the NDE description. Most importantly, this timing argument is directly contradicted by those corroborated cases, like the Dentures and Mansfield examples, where the verifiable perceptions occurred precisely during the documented period of clinical death and absent brain activity. They have specific time markers.
Are there other chemical or biological factors suggested?
Yes, hypercarbia, high CO2 levels has been proposed. But the sources state that NDE-like features are rarely seen in hypercarbia, and many NDEs occur with normal CO2. Then there's the idea of chemical imbalances or drug-like hallucinations, maybe comparing NDEs to the effects of ketamine.
Does ketamine mimic NDEs?
It can induce some similar sensations, like out-of-body feelings or detachment. But the sources highlight major differences. Ketamine experiences are often described as bizarre or frightening. Users generally know they're experiencing an illusion or drug effect, unlike the deep sense of reality NDEs report. And importantly, many central NDE elements, the life review, meeting the being of light, the profound peace, are typically absent in ketamine experiences.
What about connections to epilepsy? Temporal lobe seizures?
That's been speculated too, but a review of the medical literature cited in the sources apparently shows that the core characteristics of NDEs don't generally accompany temporal lobe seizures. Those seizures are more often linked to fragmented hallucinations, confusion, and often negative emotions.
And attempts to induce NDEs artificially, like with magnetic stimulation.
Right. Michael Persinger's God helmet experiments using transcranial magnetic stimulation over the temporal lobes. The sources state that the experiences produced had little in common with the rich, structured, and transformative nature of typical NDEs.
So the overall message from the sources regarding these biological explanations seems to be, while they might explain isolated fragments or sensations sometimes found in NDEs, none of them adequately accounts for the whole consistent package. Especially that combination of lucidity during apparent brain inactivity, verifiable perceptions, and the profound, lasting positive transformation.
That seems to be the core critique presented, yes. They suggest these explanations are insufficient to explain the phenomenon in its full complexity and implications.
Okay. But NDEs aren't the only experiences around death that the sources examine. They also discuss experiences on the threshold of death, or TODEs. What are those?
Right. TODEs are different but related. These aren't reported by people who come back from clinical death, but by individuals in the process of dying naturally in the days, hours, or minutes leading up to their actual death.
So experiences shared while actively dying.
Exactly. These are apparently quite familiar to palliative care staff and have been documented across cultures for centuries.
What are these experiences like? How do they manifest?
The state is often described as a kind of expanded consciousness, like the dying person's awareness is opening up as if, quote, a veil separating life from death was being raised.
I wonder if they actually report seeing or hearing during this time.
Very commonly, they report seeing people who have already passed away, often beloved family members or friends, but sometimes unknown spiritual figures may be described as beings of light or messengers who seem to be there to help them transition.
So they might interact with these figures.
Yes, they might be seen reaching out to them, speaking to them, sometimes relaying messages from these figures to the people at their bedside. Some also report hearing beautiful music or describing glimpses of incredibly beautiful places, another world.
The sources mention some famous last words, possibly being examples.
Yes, like Thomas Edison reportedly saying, "It's very beautiful here," or Steve Jobs' final words, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." Some interpret these as potential expressions of a toady.
How do these experiences seem to affect the person who is dying?
They're consistently reported to bring great comfort. They seem to reduce physical pain, ease emotional distress, and bring a sense of peace and serenity in the final moment.
Are they common?
Well, the sources estimate that about 90% of people are in a deep coma before death. But of the roughly 10% who remain conscious, more than half are said to report experiences like these.
Now, the obvious skeptical explanation would be, again, hallucinations. Maybe due to medication, pain, the feeling brain, wishful thinking.
And the sources absolutely acknowledge that in some cases, especially where heavy medication is involved, that could be a factor. Hallucinations can occur near death.
But they argue this isn't always the case.
Right. They present specific types of cases where the simple hallucination hypothesis seems inadequate. This is where Dr. Bruce Grayson's research, particularly a 2010 study, is highlighted.
What's significant about Grayson's work here?
He compiled cases that the sources describe as providing some of the most convincing evidence about the survival of consciousness after the death of the physical body. These are cases that are harder to explain away.
Can you share an example or two from the source material?
Sure. One case involves an indigenous woman, critically injured in a car crash, clearly dying. A stranger helping her was asked to give a message to her mother. The message was that she was fine, very happy, because she was already with her father.
Okay.
The stranger found the mother later and delivered the message. The mother confirmed that the daughter's father had actually died just an hour before the accident happened. There was no conventional way the daughter could have known her father had just died.
Wow. So she reported being with someone she thought was alive, but who had in fact just died moments before.
That's the crux of it. Another case Grayson documented involved a 7-year-old boy dying of leukemia. On his deathbed, he told his mother he'd visited heaven and met a man there who introduced himself as his mother's first love.
Someone the boy wouldn't know.
The mother was adamant she had never spoken to her son about this person. Later, she found out that this former boyfriend had died the very same day her son had the vision.
Okay. Those cases are particularly challenging for a simple hallucination explanation. The dying person seems to have accurate information about a recent death they couldn't have learned through normal means.
Precisely. That's why these specific toady accounts are considered evidentially significant in the source material. They suggest awareness beyond the physical senses or no information.
All right. Moving even further out from the dying person themselves, the sources introduce a third category, shared death experiences, or SDEs. These happen to healthy people.
Yes, exactly. SDEs were first systematically documented by Dr. Raymond Moody, the same researcher who brought NDEs to public attention. He wrote about hundreds of these cases in his book, Glimpses of Eternity.
So what is an SDE?
It's an experience had by a perfectly healthy person, usually someone with a strong emotional bond to the person who is dying, that seems to involve them somehow sharing in the dying person's transition experience, almost empathically.
Sharing the experience. How does that work? The source gives a narrative from Moody's book about a woman named Jane with her dying husband. Can we walk through that?
Yes, it's a good illustration. So Jane is sitting with her husband, who's unconscious, close to death. She suddenly perceives a white haze seeming to rise from his body. Then, a brilliant white light fills the room, completely enveloping everything.
A shared perception of light.
Apparently. Jane then feels dizzy and realizes she's floating near the ceiling. She's having an OBE, looking down at her own body in the chair and seeing her husband nearby, also seemingly out of his body, smiling at her.
So the healthy person has an OBE too.
According to these accounts, yes. They then report floating together. Scenes from their shared life, and even his life before her, unfold around them like a 3D hologram near the bed.
A shared life review.
It seems like it. They then move towards a corner, and Jane gets this strange impression that the room's geometry is changing. It looks odd, not at right angles, taking on unusual shapes.
A distortion of perceived space.
Interesting.
Yes. Then an opening appears, described like a tube or a doorway, a door to another world. She and her husband enter it.
And what's inside? They find themselves in this breathtaking, Edenic landscape, a place of incredible beauty and splendor, maybe with that same ethereal music heard in NDEs.
And does this shared journey also have a boundary?
It does. They reach a stream. Jane understands intuitively that she can't cross it, but her husband can. She feels immense joy for him, knowing he's free from suffering. She says goodbye and then instantly finds herself back in her physical body, sitting beside her husband, who has now passed away.
That's an incredible account. It combines so many NDE elements, the OBE, the light, the life review, the beautiful realm, but experienced, at least partially, by someone healthy. Based on Moody's research cited, what are the key recurring elements of SDEs?
Moody identified several common themes, as listed in the source. perceiving spiritual beings, often deceased loved ones of the dying person, entering the room around the time of death,
Okay.
seeing the dying person's spirit or essence leaving the body, maybe as a mist or a transparent form, perceiving that brilliant, mystical light felt as intensely loving and peaceful, sometimes participating in the dying person's life review, seeing scenes holographically.
And the room changing shape.
Yes, that impression of altered geometry or space, discovering that otherworldly, beautiful landscape, often with ethereal music, and in some cases actually accompanying the deceased towards the light, involving the observer having their own brief OBE in return.
What kind of impact do these SDEs have on the healthy people who experience them?
Much like NDEs, they're described as profoundly transformative. For the bystander, it often eases the grief and pain of loss and powerfully reinforces a belief in life after death.
Similar after effects to NDEs.
Very similar. Experiencers report increased empathy, a tendency to reevaluate their life priorities, leading to lifestyle changes. They often describe feeling a new sense of maturity, a greater depth to their life.
More reflection.
Yes, more reflection on philosophical questions, less impulsivity, an increased awareness of their own consciousness, and a greater focus on love, connection, and seeking knowledge. The sources also mentioned they often seem to have a calming influence on others afterwards.
And Dr. Charbonnier, I mentioned earlier, makes a really important point about why SDEs are significant evidence, doesn't he?
He does. He emphasizes that SDEs are particularly difficult to explain away using purely biological arguments like lack of oxygen or brain disorders, because the person having the SDE is, by definition, healthy. Their brain isn't compromised by illness or dying.
So if a healthy person shares aspects of a transcendental experience simultaneously with a dying person,
It strongly challenges explanations tied solely to the dying brain's pathology. It suggests something else might be going on.
okay. Finally, the sources touch upon some truly extraordinary cases of apparent physical healings following NDEs, described as medically inexplicable.
These are perhaps the most startling accounts. One detailed case is that of Germaine Chalut, a 79-year-old woman back in 2014. She was critically ill, severe peritonitis from a ruptured intestine, widespread infection across multiple organs, in an induced coma. Her condition was dire.
Doctors gave no hope.
None. They told her daughter, who was a nurse, that it was hopeless. Based on Germaine's previously expressed wishes, the family made the incredibly difficult decision to withdraw life support. They gathered to say their final goodbyes.
But then,
Yeah.
something completely unexpected happened.
Utterly unexpected. The next morning, instead of passing away, Germaine was found sitting up in bed, conscious, alert, full of energy, and reporting no pain or fever. Apparently she was starving.
What? And she reported an NDE?
Yes, she said she'd gone through a tunnel towards a brilliant light. But here's the medically baffling part. A CT scan taken shortly after showed that the massive infection in her abdomen had somehow partially resorbed overnight.
Partially healed itself.
It appeared so. They gave her IV antibiotics just in case, and she went home. Within 6 weeks, the infection had completely vanished.
And the sources described this as
Completely inexplicable from a medical point of view. They also noted she underwent a significant personality change from being quite anxious before to being profoundly calm afterward.
And this isn't the only case like this cited.
No, the famous case of Anita Moorjani is also mentioned. She was in a coma in 2006 with end-stage, stage 5E lymphoma, organs shutting down. She had a powerful NDE. Upon returning, her cancer reportedly vanished completely within weeks, again described as medically inexplicable.
What interpretation do the sources offer for these dramatic healing cases?
They suggest that these occurrences might imply that during their NDE, the experiencers contacted a higher power that infinitely transcended the physical world and the domain of the living. And this contact somehow facilitated the inexplicable healing.
Okay, so let's try and bring all these threads together. We've looked at near-death experiences, their common features, the lucid OBEs, the profound transformations. We've looked at experiences on the threshold of death, dying people seemingly perceiving recent unknown deaths, and shared death experiences, healthy individuals apparently tuning into the dying process.
And collectively, as presented in our source material, these phenomena really do mount a significant challenge to purely materialist models of mind and consciousness, especially those corroborated perceptions during periods when the brain, by all standard measures, should be offline.
And the sources systematically critique the common biological explanations: anoxia, G-force, timing issues, CO2, chemical effects, epilepsy, suggesting none fully capture the whole picture, particularly the verifiable lucidity and the deep lasting changes.
Right. The consistency and the profound nature of the transformations reported in NDE and SDE experiencers are hard to dismiss as just temporary physiological glitches. And the evidential weight of SDEs happening in healthy people, alongside those specific TODI cases involving verifiable information, makes brain-only explanations seem less sufficient.
And then you layer on top these incredibly puzzling, medically baffling cases of apparent physical healing.
It leaves you with this whole body of observations that really pushes at the edges of our current scientific understanding of consciousness, its relationship to the body, and maybe even the nature of life and death itself.
This deep dive has certainly taken us into fascinating territory, where a careful observation of reported experiences intersects with those fundamental age-old human questions.
Absolutely. The source material, by examining NDEs, TODIs, and SDEs together, strongly suggests these phenomena might point towards a reality where consciousness isn't just a byproduct of the brain, but perhaps something more fundamental.
It really underscores that while there's still so much debate and research needed, these accounts are remarkably consistent across different people, different cultures, and their impact on those who experience them is undeniably profound and often life-changing.
The consistency is key.
So here's a final thought for you, our listeners, to ponder, drawing directly from the material we've explored today. If consciousness can perceive reality accurately, retain memories, and undergo deep transformation during times when the brain shows no signs of functional activity, or even when a person is perfectly healthy but witnessing a death, what does that really imply about the fundamental nature of awareness itself?
Is it solely generated by the brain? Or could it be something more primary, something that the brain perhaps mediates or receives, but which can, under certain extreme circumstances, function independently? That's the provocative question these experiences leave us with.